Welcome and thank you for joining us for our online event, Investing in Maine Trails. My name is Kristen Jackson. I'm the Digital Outreach Manager with the Natural Resources Council of Maine and your host for today's webinar. I'm joined with three wonderful speakers. We have Pete Didisheim, who's the NRCM's Advocacy Director, Ellie Ezekiel, who's Director of Communications and Community Outreach at the Frenchman Conservancy, and Chris Riley, member of the Maine Recreational Trail Program Advisory Committee and the New England Mountain Bike Association, Central Maine chapter. And this webinar is hosted by the Natural Resources Council of Maine, which is the state's largest environmental advocacy organization. And we harness the power of science, the law, and voices of people like yourself to protect the nature of Maine. And today we are here to talk about Maine's trails. I hope you all can agree with me, and I assume that you do by joining us today, that Maine is home to some really amazing trails, whether it's around our lakes or in our forests or up and down our coastline or in our mountains or just in our backyard. We have some of the best trails in the country, I think we could all argue. But many of our trails are in need of serious repair and maintenance, and more funding is needed to build new trails that are accessible and could support active transportation. And that's where the Maine Trails Bond comes in. But before we dive in and hear from our speakers, I'll just cover a few housekeeping items. So the first is that this event will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything that you'd like to revisit or share with others, we'll make sure to share that link out to all of you once it's ready to go. And then we will have time for question and answer at the end of the presentations. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, which can be accessed down at the bottom of your screen on your menu. You'll see the Q&A option. You can also put them in the chat, but sometimes things get lost in the chat because it keeps moving. So they're more likely to be seen if they're put in the Q&A box. And then last, this is a webinar setup. So right now you can see and hear all of our speakers. Attendees, your cameras are not on, but you are able to participate in the chat and again in the Q&A box if you have questions. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Didisheim, who's going to kick it off and tell us more about the Maine Trails Bond.
Great. So thank you, Kristen. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to share our excitement about Maine Trails and to also describe this opportunity to invest in Maine Trails. So let me, does that show up? Everybody can see that? Kristen, look good?
That looks great.
Okay, all right. So we're going to talk about the Maine Trails Bond. This is a first ever opportunity at the State House to create a funding mechanism that the state would provide through a bond to invest in Maine Trails. So let me just see. Is it advancing? Did it advance? Okay. Did that advance? Okay, all right, great. So let me just give you the basics first. The Maine Trails Bond is a piece of legislation introduced at the State House by Representative Jessica Fay, who's a Democrat from Raymond. I'll get into the details of the other co-sponsors in a minute. It would provide $30 million over a 4-year period, $7.5 million per year. That money would go to the Bureau of Parks and Lands, and it would be managed through their Recreational Trails program staff. And the money would provide grants to organizations, to municipalities for motorized, non-motorized, multi-use trails for the design, maintenance, and creation of trails. And there'd be a 20% match. So this Maine Trails Bond does shine a spotlight on what we were just discussing, that two things. One, Maine has incredible trails. We have fabulous trails in wild areas. We've got trails near our homes. We've got snowmobile trails. We've got trails for biking, skiing, hiking, walking, strolling, ATVs. We have an enormous resource of trails. But as we also recognize, we need to invest in these trails to move to the next level of a top tier state in the nation that's recognized for our trails. We have the Down East Sunrise Trail, which is 87 miles. This is the longest off-road trail on the East Coast Greenway. It travels through Hancock and Washington counties. It's an enormous and wonderful resource for the communities along that trail. We also have, as I said, wilderness experience trails where you can get into deep woods in the state of Maine and feel disconnected from the rest of society, which is a wonderful and nurturing experience. We've got trails that are near our homes that we can run on and commute on. And there are some wonderful visionary plans for more of these arterial corridor trails that would connect our communities throughout the state. And all these trails contribute to Maine's outdoor recreation economy, which is about a $3 billion economy, supporting something like 31,000 jobs. And when you think about the many ways that people come to the state to enjoy our outdoors, so many of them come here and incorporate trails into their experience here in the state. Snowmobiling alone contributes an estimated $600 million to our economy and supports a lot of jobs. Much of this is in rural Maine. This is incredibly important for towns, mom and pop shops. It's also part of the heritage of rural Maine, as is the heritage, the trails are a heritage for all of us. And during the pandemic, people discovered trails at a much higher rate. These are national numbers that suggest that 79% increase in use of trails just during those first months of the pandemic. And that's at the national level. The same thing was experienced here. Lots of people, myself included, probably many of you on this webinar, used Maine Trail Finder. You probably discovered through Maine Trail Finder trails that you didn't even know were right nearby. And I think my wife and I and many of others, friends of ours, got to lots of land trusts, other trails that we really hadn't taken advantage of. Maine Trail Finder now has more than 1,100 trails on its resource, online resource, with more than 6,200 miles of trails, which is really incredible. But here's an incredible and really important takeaway fact. Maine invests almost nothing in our trails. There is a little bit of money that is distributed by the Bureau of Parks and Lands that's federal money that comes to us through the Federal Recreational Trail Program. It's not very much. And then there's also some funding that ATV and snowmobile clubs get through the registration fees for those vehicles, and they get some gas tax funding. But we really take our trails for granted. And there's really no significant state funding that is going into the design, development, maintenance of our trails. So here's the bill that was introduced. It's LD 1156. As I mentioned, Representative Fay is the sponsor. Representative Russell Black, a Republican from Franklin County, is the original co-sponsor. And the bill has 4 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and an independent. These are the priorities for the Maine Trails Bond in the bill in terms of grant proposals. We want grants to come in for sustainable design projects that will last. Many of our trails right now were not designed to sustain heavy rainfalls and heavy use. We want trails to come in, grant proposals that will expand the number of accessible trails, inclusive trail design. And it's important for grants as they're submitted, if this bond goes through, to demonstrate broad-based community support. Already this bond has received the support of more than 270 organizations, businesses, and towns statewide. And this is just a sampling on the screen right now. The State Chamber of Commerce, the Tourism Association, the Snowmobile Association, Teens to Trails, lots of individual cities and towns, regional chambers of commerce, Maine Outdoor Brands, Maine Council on Aging. This long list demonstrates how important trails are to Maine people. So we held a press conference, announced this big coalition in support of the Maine Trails Bond. Here's some photos from that news conference. And then we also met in the upper right-hand corner. Some of the speakers met with Senate President Troy Jackson. So we're in the part of the legislative process where we're now bringing advocacy to legislators, urging that they support the Trails Bond. This Thursday will be the public hearing for the Maine Trails Bond, Thursday afternoon at the Appropriations Committee. They're hearing bond proposals throughout the week, and we are one of many proposals for bonds. And so our goal is to first persuade the Appropriations Committee to support the bill and then send it out to the House and Senate, where it's going to need a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to send it to Maine voters, and they would have the opportunity to vote on it in the fall. These are the different bond proposals that are going to be heard this week. Maine Trails is the one that we really hope will be approved and sent along, but it's in competition. There's more than $760 million worth of proposals. We're really looking for a thumbs up from the Appropriations Committee for the Trails Bond. And just to put the Trails Bond in perspective, over the last 15 years, the legislature has sent out to Maine voters, after they've approved by 2/3 votes in the House and Senate, $1.1 billion worth of highway bonds. And during this period, we have spent no money on bonding for trails. We really are sure that if we invest in these trails, it will create jobs and help build up the number of people who are pursuing professional careers in trail maintenance and trail work. That is an important part of this 4-year spending plan, is to create some stability and funding that does enable companies that currently work on trails to expand their workforce. The legislature, in particular, the House of Representatives, is going to be the key decision-making body. To get 101 votes in the House, we will need all the Democrats and probably 20 Republicans. In the Senate, we'll need all the Democrats and 2 Republicans. So we are spending quite a bit of time talking with Republicans in the State House. And so far, we're getting pretty positive support. And when they see the list of organizations, businesses, and towns that have already endorsed the Trails Bond, they're quite impressed. It's not every day that you see this diversity, either geographic or type of organization, that is coming together in support of something that unites us, which is our fondness for the existing trails that we have today and our understanding that Maine has a very bright future in building more trails. This is a poll that was done in 2019 that asked the question if Maine voters, if they would approve a trail bond, and it shows that 74% of the public would support a trails bond. So we're quite confident that if it gets on the ballot, Maine people will vote yes. There's lots of ways that you can help, and we will send a follow-up email after probably tomorrow with a link to the webinar, but also some additional details of how you can help. But we encourage all of you to contact your representative and senator and urge them to support LD 1156, the Trails Bond. You can encourage your town to pass to support the letter in support of the Trails Bond. And what we really want the message to be is, let's give Maine people a chance to vote yes for trails. If we give them the chance, we're quite confident that they will approve 30 million, which would be a really wonderful investment in the future of our trail system. So let me stop there and pass it on to Ellie.
Thanks so much, Pete. Yeah, we're going to turn it over to Ellie. I'm going to pull up her slides so that we're ready to go.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. So hello, everyone. My name is Ellie, and I'm the Director of Communications and Community Engagement with Frenchman Bay Conservancy. We're a nationally accredited land trust in Down East Maine. You can go to the next slide. So we are the local land trust for Eastern Hancock County, where we focus on conserving distinctive ecosystems, lands, and waters from the Union River watershed over by the Ellsworth area, Mariahville, you can see here on the map, and Frenchman Bay watersheds east to the Hancock County line. We serve towns like Ellsworth, Goldsboro, Sullivan, and more. You can go to the next slide. We are what I kind of call, we are Acadia adjacent. So we are not dealing with the same influx of tourists and visitors that you get in Acadia, but a lot of our properties are very close by. So you can see this shot here of a recently acquired community forest, the Frenchman Bay Community Forest, which is in Hancock, Maine. And out in the distance on the horizon, you can see MDI. So When Pete originally reached out to me about being a part of this presentation, talking about the importance of trails in this region, I was really excited because trails in Down East Maine, they're not just important for the tourism industry they support, although that is of course vital, but also because of the myriad of benefits that local land trusts can provide to the year-round local community. And so I'm going to just pause here a moment to share a video, which we produced in 2019, that I think really helps tell the story of one of our downtown trails, the Jordan Homestead Preserve. One moment. Always has to be something.
So we're at the Jordan Homestead today. This is a property that Frenchman Bay Conservancy bought just a couple of years ago. And it's a beautiful 30-acre wooded parcel on the Union River.
We're only 1.5 miles from downtown Ellsworth, and our Indian Point Preserve, which is 13 acres, is just north of here.
And just a couple of years ago, we got a phone call from someone who said, you might want to check out this land here on the Union River. It represents one of the last large areas of open space this close to Ellsworth. And we knew right away that this would be a fantastic place for a preserve, so we wanted to conserve it. Later, we closed on the property, and we knew that we wanted to expand the trail network some more. Our land protection manager realized that there's a great opportunity here with this close to Ellsworth, that if we can improve this just a little bit more, it's going to be that much more accessible for people of all ages. So today, we've got a group of volunteers out here working with the direction of a Maine Conservation Corps environmental steward.
I'm Josh. I'm an environmental steward with the Maine Conservation Corps, but I'm stationed at Frenchman Bay Conservancy. So my baby for the summer has been Jordan Homestead. We've spent the past several months essentially redoing the entire trail. We've been clearing corridor, cutting tread, bringing in bog bridging, doing stone work. It's essentially starting the trail from scratch. We've done just a tremendous amount of work. We've had over 200 volunteer hours at Jordan Homestead.
So we have volunteers here today that have traveled from Winter Harbor, from Gouldsboro, from Sullivan and Franklin. Some people are new to this, and other people have years of experience building trails.
Having this many volunteers has been absolutely astounding. They're all amazing, they all do great work. I've worked at a lot of organizations before, and I've never seen anything where we've had this many volunteers consistently come week after week.
One great story that happened just recently is Maine Coast Heritage Trust, a really solid partner. They came out and lent us a boat for a little while, lent us a hand moving bog bridging. So we dropped off about 50 pieces of bog bridging up at Harbor Park and then shuttled it down to the river and carried it up the slope. This is all done by hand, and all the work is done with hand tools. So it's not possible without volunteers, and we're really thankful for all the time that people have put in. Frenchman Bay Conservancy has 30 miles of hiking trails on our preserves. One of the reasons that we're so excited to have trails is because it provides that opportunity for people to reconnect with nature. You know, we conserve land to protect wildlife habitat. We conserve land to protect clean water, including drinking water and access for people to get to the water. And we also protect places so that people can get out into the woods and people can experience nature. And so I think that's one of the reasons that people get involved and volunteer is that initial connection, getting out in the woods, standing in a beautiful grove of old white pines, or hearing a babbling brook, or maybe a wildlife sighting. You know, those opportunities to be out in the woods are really special. So we're so thankful to be able to provide that.
All right, so that trail that you just watched those volunteers help us build, this is the Jordan Homestead Preserve Trail. It's a 1 mile lollipop trail. It's near downtown Ellsworth. It might not have specific views that Acadia offers. It might not have the mountain, peak to reach, but it remains to this day one of our most popular trails. The value that people find in it is because it's family friendly, it's manageable, it's safe. It's there for the people who have a 9-to-5 workday and they need somewhere to go and decompress after work. It's there for families who are looking to find ways to, avoid screen time, engage in the outdoors. there for people with dogs, looking for solitude, providing green space, connectivity around town. It's shown through studies that spending quality time in the outdoors, it doesn't have to be in a national park, but even just your local land trust, it reduces stress, it calms your anxiety, and it can lead to a lower risk of depression. Trails are just so much more than a place to walk, and we're so proud to be able to continue build and bring these trails. Now, if you could go to the next slide. Thanks to a new partnership with Maine Outdoor School, a local business in this area, we're also able to transform our trails into classrooms. So right now we have a program where we partner with all 10 public elementary schools in our region. And they each have a classroom that gets to go outside and combine their curriculum with the outdoors. And so whether it's English, math, it doesn't matter the subject, there are ways to connect people, these students, to the outdoors and build some of that conservation empathy. Now, next slide, please. As Pete mentioned, since the pandemic, trail use has really skyrocketed. We do not have trail counters out on our preserves, but Acadia National Park continues to see raising rates of visitation, hitting over 4 million annual visitors, and the spillover to our local trails is very evident. The wear, the tear on our 30 miles means that we're now kind of facing a backlog of projects on our preserves. So bridges that need replacing, unsustainable trails that might need renovation or restoration, and other types of maintenance needs. There's also adaptation that we need to do as we continue to feel the impacts of climate change and plan for more in the future, such as flooding, seasonal shifts. It's important that we're able to stay up to date on our trails and they don't continue to erode over time. Next slide. So each year we do have a slew of projects to tackle, and funding from the Maine Trails Bond would be extremely beneficial in making sure that we can tackle ambitious trail stewardship projects. Projects that aren't just going to restore and repair trails, but also bring these trails into the modern day. And I mention that because, like so many other land trusts, a lot of our trails are actually inherited. So they weren't planned by trail building professionals, perhaps, but maybe someone who owned a large parcel of land and built their own trails. And while that's fantastic and we're so excited to have them, it does mean that over time, some of them have eroded. They may not have been built in the most sustainable way or remain accessible in the long term. So that kind of brings me to my final point on the importance of trails, which is that it's critical that when we're building trails, investing in new ones, is that they're accessible for all. Could you go to the next slide, please? So in October 2022, we actually opened our first accessible trail, meaning that it meets ADA standards in Ellsworth. And this is the Ellsworth River Walk. Here, another community partner and I met with Enoch Glidden, an accessible trail advocate who now works with Maine Trail Finder. His work traveling around the state, visiting trails, rating trails, and seeing which type of trails provide the right accessible adventure, what opportunities there are, what barriers. His work really opened up our eyes to the importance of making sure that these trails are being built for people of all abilities. But it has also unfortunately opened our eyes to the cost of establishing trail systems that will accomplish that goal. Next slide. And so as we look to the future and we think about future preserves and trails and new systems, something like the Maine Trails Bond, it would be critical to make sure that we can kind of continue to provide the recreational and community benefits that we do today, but bring them into, today's standards, today's modern trail standards. And so with that, thank you. And let me know if you have any questions and I will pass it off to Chris Riley.
Thanks so much, Ellie. And yeah, a reminder, you can put your questions if you have them for either Pete or Ellie in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end. But otherwise, take it away, Chris.
Oh, thanks so much. I am going to skip over a bunch because Pete and Ellie have really touched on a lot of what I had to say. So, and the risk of repeating what's already been said, I'm just going to hit a few high points and then I'll just pass it back to you, Kristen, for the Q&A portion. One of the things and I come to this from a mountain biker's perspective, but I'm also, been a hiker my whole life and will oftentimes just find myself in the woods on a walk on local trails just to clear my head after work. So I'm not just a mountain biker, but that's how I'm coming to this conversation. Maine has an enormous potential for increased trail assets for people to ride bikes on, and that comes from, when I say mountain biking, that means anything that's not pavement or off-road biking. So the Sunrise Trail is one end of the spectrum, and then some of the more technical, challenging trails that are being built, places like Carabasset Valley, Millinocket, the smaller trail systems all around the state are the other end of that spectrum. And then you have, the ski areas, which are getting involved. One of the things we saw at the start of the pandemic was that the bike industry just exploded. And we saw trail usage more than doubled. All you had to do was tell people that they had to stay inside, and then they went outside and found the trails. It's a wonderful sociology experiment to see how that changed trail usage. And the downside of that is we've seen a significant increase in the effects that the trails have had on them, and the need for upkeep and maintenance. The majority of trail building and trail maintenance in the state, to my understanding, has been due to volunteers, and whether it be land trusts or smaller organizations like ours, or even municipal municipally run volunteer organizations. And it's just, volunteerism is dropping, and so we're seeing the need for paid labor to help bring these trails back, and to bring them to a state where they're not as susceptible to erosion. So that's a big piece of this bond for me, is to help us as a state find funding to create an industry where trail building is a viable option for people as a job, as employment. The other piece is that this state is lagging. We have a ton of trails for hiking. We have probably one of the most desirable trail systems in the north, or in the country, for snowmobiling, and Pete touched on that. We have lots of small preserves, but we're lacking in places to mountain bike. And if I can share, I just want to share a quick graphic. I'll share my screen real quick, and then you just bear with me 1 second while I navigate to it. Desktop, I think that's it. Hang on. Did I get this right, Kristen? You're going to need to help me. Oh, share. Hang on. Yeah. Share. Yes. Right. Can you see me now?
We can see you. We cannot yet see your screen. Did you hit the blue share button?
I did. Share screen. Let me try this again. Share. Oh. It is not allowing me to share my screen. Hold. There's something about preferences I have to fix. My apologies. Maybe what I'll do is I'll send it to you. But let me skip that for right now, and I'll go to the economic impact piece, which was really the one that was most impressive to me. So I did a quick little research and just found a couple statistics. So if you're a biker, you're probably familiar with the Kingdom Trails Association, which is in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, a small town. Our similar towns in Maine, would be Rangeley, Greenville, Carabasset, of size, and there's a waterways, it's a small village, etc. But that town has over 100 miles of trails in that town, and as of 2016, that was the latest data I could find. They generated an estimated $7.8 million in direct spending and another $3.8 million in indirect spending. And that data comes from the New England Ski Journal. Rumors are that number is closer to 15 million now in direct spending. And I don't know what the indirect would be, but I would imagine it would also have grown incrementally. But there's another case study. So Northwest Arkansas, in the town of Bentonville, has received an incredible amount of funding to help them grow and become a destination. And most of that money has come from the Walton family. So for for those who don't know, that's Walmart, Sam's Club, etc. And I'm just going to read this to you. So this is from an economic impact study that was done by the Southern Off-Road Bicycle Association, but bicycling produced an estimated $51 million business benefit, $51 million business benefit to the Northwest Arkansas economy in 2017, including 21 million in reported household and resident spending on bicycles, bicycle goods, equipment, and events. $3 million in bicycle retail sales and retail sales taxes paid by local customers, and approximately $27 million in tourism spending by out-of-staters. Bicycling, and this is also really fascinating, bicycling in Northwest Arkansas keeps children and adults active and decreases prevalence of adverse health conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. We all know that getting outside is healthy and great on so many levels, but it contributed an estimated 86 million in total health benefits to the local economy, including 79 million in reduced mortality and 7 million in avoided healthcare costs. So I think I look at the need for this bond from a whole bunch of angles, but from an economic impact case, both from a state that is aging and has not the greatest health statistics, this helps us as a state get outside and be healthier, and the benefits of that are staggering. So I hope that's helpful. Kristen, I'm gonna try and send you those 2 screenshots because I can't seem to get my screen sharing to work, and I don't want to waste anybody's time.
Yeah, that sounds great. Send them along and we can get started on questions and then go back to them. Well, thanks so much, Chris and Ellie and Pete. That was very helpful for me. I hope others enjoyed all that information. I have a couple questions coming in, but feel free if you have questions to pop them again in the Q&A box or in the chat, whichever is easier for you. But we'll dive in first with a question that came in over email when folks are registering. Pete, I think this is a question for you. We had someone asking if this trails bond would include water trails and, saying that there are some water trails around the state and would love to have more.
Yeah, this is an all-in trail grant opportunity. So any kind of trail, a water trail, an equestrian trail, mountain biking, hiking. Yes, there could be a grant proposal that's for a landing for a water trail, for signage, for any sort of maintenance that might be needed or investment in infrastructure that could be helpful for a water trail. So the Maine Island Trail Association is just one of the 270 organizations that have supported this, as has the Northern Forest Canoe Trail.
Awesome. And I think that leads us to the second question that we got, which is about the mechanisms of the bonds. So typically bonds are used for capital investment only. How will this bond enable use of funds for trail maintenance, which is not a capital investment?
So this very explicitly in the bill language itself and in the ballot measure question that would appear on the ballot if it's sent out to the voters, and in the title of the bill, states that this funding is for the investment in the design, development, and maintenance of trails. So I guess that the review team that would be looking at grant proposals probably is less interested in kind of routine cleanup of trails and would be more interested in maintenance that involves repair of bridges, other more significant upgrade and repairs, rerouting of trails, that sort of more investment heavy maintenance sort of work. But it is an overlooked area for funding opportunities, and it's not often available to land trusts and trail stewards. So a number of the folks who have come out in support of the Trails Bond are particularly attracted to this ability to tap into some funds that's not strictly capital, but also is investment in maintenance.
Great, thanks. And Chris, I just got those screenshots from you, so I'm going to try and share those. And you can tell folks what we're looking at. Just give me a sec. Where'd it go? Sorry. Hold on, I lost the window. I'm so sorry. Okay, are folks seeing that?
Yep, can see it on my end, Kristen.
There we
Awesome,
go.
great. You want to tell
There
folks
we
what we're
go.
looking
So-
at here, Chris?
Okay, so I just want, this is just a, it's just a great graphic because, so this is pulled from an application called Trail Forks, which is a lot like Maine Trail Finder for those who haven't used it, but it's a national database. It's user generated, and you can filter between what kind of trail system you want to use, hiking, walking, pedestrian, or equestrian, sorry. I filtered through mountain biking in this case. And so there's a photo on the left is to our west, that's Vermont and New Hampshire. And the photo on our right is Maine. And it really highlights, you know, how we're being outpaced by our two other true New England states, Vermont and New Hampshire. And, you know, if you were to span out even further south to Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York, it's even more impressive to see what's going on in these other states and the investment that they're having in, you know, these recreational assets. So I just thought that was an important graph for people to see, and, you know, as it pertains to, you know, what could be.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got some work to do. We got to catch up. If anyone has competitive spirit in them, that could put that behind them. All right, we have a few more questions. Let's see. Joe has a couple questions. One is, will we hear about the committee's decision on Thursday from you? So yes, there will be a public hearing on Thursday. If you take an action on Maine Trails Bond through NRCM's action alert, we'll definitely keep folks posted on what happened and what the next steps are. Pete, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, it will be the public hearing, but the work session, when they actually take a vote, won't happen for a week or two. And what we're hoping is that out of that big basket of bond bills, they likely will defeat a lot of them and hang on to a handful. And we want to make that first cut so that we're part of the small handful that they think have demonstrated sufficient support broadly, that they're worth staying out there as a possibility to move forward.
Great. David here says he is strictly interested in non-motorized recreation and that the bill language carves out funding for non-motorized trails, and wants to know if e-bikes are excluded on such trails or if we need amended language for that.
I don't know the answer to that, but it would probably, so 30% of the funding would be for non-motorized and 20% is for motorized, and the balance of 50% is for diverse use. And so the 30% for non-motorized, my guess is that that funding is really intended to be for non-motorized, and I would guess that e-bikes probably would be considered. But the other 70% potentially is available for grant proposals that might include e-bikes.
Yeah, and Pete, I could touch that a little bit. E-bikes have been an evolving thing in the state, and I believe the law was just changed. It is now an opt-out law versus an opt-in. God, I hope I get that correct. But essentially, meaning that it's up to the landowner and it's up to the land manager about e-bikes. So every town is a little different, every municipality is a little different, but I do not believe e-bikes are categorized. Class 1 and Stu just posted a question. Class 1 and 2 are considered non-motorized. Stu, I think that's class 1 and 3. Class 1 and 3 require the person to pedal the bike to make it move. Class 2 has a throttle. So class 2 are often considered an electronic motorcycle. Class 1 and class 3 are electric assist, and electric assist bicycles are becoming more openly adopted by various towns and trail systems. So I think it would not be a hurdle for these trail systems, and I think, you know, you're seeing a lot of places where e-bikes are being integrated and being used, but it's a slow process as people start to really learn what they're all about. But I don't think that would be a hurdle for this bond and projects that relate to the bond.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. Yeah, while we're talking about motorized and non-motorized vehicles, and Winchester brought up a point that often trails that allow ATVs, the vehicles can go fast and intimidate walkers and bikers. And so was curious how many trails will invite or include ATV use. And it sounds like 20% of the bonds are for motorized trails. Is that right?
For motorized only, right? There's many snowmobile trails and ATV trails that also have management plans that incorporate other uses. So that potentially is eligible for some of the other pots of money.
Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that much of this is that the percentages are very similar to the RTP program, which is Recreational Trails Program. So for those that are not familiar with that, that is the current funding mechanism through the state, which is an annual process. And they disperse funds. It's an application process very similar to what we're going to be doing for this one, and it's a percentage, some percentage for mechanized or motorized, some percentage for another similar percentage for non-motorized only, and then there's mixed use, which is the bulk, is the majority of it. So a trail that would be open to both hikers, walkers, equestrians, that would be a mixed use trail, or a trail that's open like the Sunrise Trail to motorized and non-motorized. So I think that's how the equation is set up. I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it's similar to RTP.
It is, and I think that one's 30, 30, and 40%. This one's 30, 20, and 50%. So very close. Yep.
Great. Let's see, Jackie asked in the chat if we have a link to a list of legislators' contact information. I'm going to drop for everybody. We have an action alert set up that has a draft message and will connect you to your legislator so you can send them an email. It's best if you personalize the message if you're able to, but also sending that sample message is helpful as well. So that link is in the chat now, and we'll include that in our follow-up email too. This might be a question for you, Ellie. We had Sandy ask how we can get younger people involved in trail maintenance, and a lot of the trail clubs that they've been involved in is aging, and it's been hard to find young people to get involved. So I'd be curious if you have any perspective on that.
Oh, the age-old question. How to get more volunteers out on the trail. Well, I think a really important piece of it, and an area we've found some success, is rather than just trying to put the ask out to everybody in the area, really going through network. So a lot of our volunteers are also on the older side, and we ask them, who do you know in your communities that you can help bring out, show the joy of being out on trails, and kind of start building that connection rather than, it's almost like avoiding the cold call, figuring out ways to make it an easier pipeline. But yeah, it's a growing challenge to make sure that we have people who are available to be out on the trails. And it's just about, trying to make it fun, and make it accessible. So finding the right times of day where people are available, building out other opportunities than just some of the, regular work days, which tend to be during work hours and all of those different, barriers.
Great, thanks. We have a question about some of the mechanisms of the bond, which might be good for you to answer, Pete. So first we have, if it's approved by the voters, what is the process for determining where the money will go? And then a sort of related question, is Parks and Land staff currently, or is staffed and up enough currently to administer the program? So how's that kind of administering the grants going to work, and are the staff available?
Yes, so if it's approved by the voters, then the state treasurer would be authorized to issue bonds for up to $7.5 million per year for 4 years in a row. That money would go to the Bureau of Parks and Land program that currently administers about $1 million or 1.4 million a year in federal funding. So this would be a substantial infusion of new resources into the program that has been managing grants, very small grants. And Chris, I think you were maybe on the RTP advisory committee.
I sat on the committee for 3 years, I think, which is the standard term.
Yeah. So there's a committee that Chris was on that is the review committee that looks at grant proposals as they come in. This funding would create an opportunity for larger grants, more grants, touching more communities, more land trusts statewide. So it would be just distributed, but because of that increased volume of grants, the program at BPL would need to staff up, and the bond language does allow up to 3% of the total funds to be available to add some additional staff capacity in order to administer the funds. Because it's not just a matter of putting the funds in the agency, you need to then manage that whole process effectively to disperse the funds in a timely manner to get them out so that they're making a difference in communities.
Great. And Doug Beck pointed out in the chat to the hosts that a portion of the bond will also establish funding for trail planning up to $175,000.
And that's exciting too, because that isn't usually available for grant applicants to actually spend some money on the design and development and planning.
Great. Okay, I think I'm seeing one more question. If folks have any, we still have a few more minutes though, so if folks still have questions, feel free to drop them. This last question, Kyler, I think we can follow up with you offline. They're asking if there's a subset of legislators that would be especially helpful to target, and if sending action alerts to folks in their network. So happy to follow up with you on that, but Pete, I don't know if you want to say anything to that.
Well, bonds are a particularly interesting legislative bill. You need the support of legislative leaders in both parties. So bonds often are among the last pieces of legislation that are worked out. So the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, the minority leaders in both parties in the House and Senate, those are important people to communicate with. The first set of decision makers will be the Appropriations Committee. I believe that it really will be the 5 Republicans on the committee that will make the most difference on this. So those are an important group of lawmakers to communicate with. And because a bond measure needs a 2/3 vote in both chambers, as I mentioned, you can't reach that unless you have probably close to 20 Republicans in the House joining with the Democrats. I think we have been hearing, as I mentioned earlier, some surprisingly positive responses to this, given the partisanship over budgeting, and so I am somewhat optimistic right now that this could be one of the few bonds for which there is a 2/3 vote in the House and Senate, but it really is going to depend on us generating a lot of steady communications over the next 3 to 4 weeks to legislators so that they are clearly hearing from their constituents that this is a priority for them and their communities. So
Great.
I encourage everybody to communicate to your legislator. No matter who they are, it becomes part of the chatter of what they talk about among themselves in their caucuses and in the halls at the State House. And if any of you want to come up to the State House and speak with your legislator in person, NRCM does have a lobby day on May 4th, and you could register for that on our website and come to Augusta, and we will give you some training on this and some other bills, and you can go over to the State House and meet with we'll make sure that you have an opportunity to speak directly with your representative and senator in support of this bill and other bills that may be of interest.
Yeah, thanks for that plug, Pete. I just dropped in the chat our Take Action page, which has a few things. It has that sample action where you can send messages to your legislators. It has some other how-tos on submitting testimony on bills and writing letters to the editor, so feel free to peruse that. And then I also dropped in the chat the registration for our State House Action Day, where folks will be coming to Augusta to talk to their legislators about issues, including this one. Okay, we had a few more questions come in from that, so we'll do a couple more and then we'll wrap up. We had someone ask if we anticipate there's going to be resistance to the bond. I feel like you've talked a little bit about this, Pete, but if you have anything to elaborate on there.
I haven't met anybody who says that they hate I hate trails. I have run into a number of people who are not big fans of bonds. Bonds do involve, issuing a bond and then paying interest on that bond. However, I've looked at the interest rates over the last 40 years in the bonding of the state, and the state of Maine has issued bonds for hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 30, 40 years when the interest rates were higher than they are today. So although interest rates have gone up, if you look at when the Land for Maine's Future program was started in 1987, interest rates were much larger than they are now with that $35 million bond. And when the Land for Maine's Future program received $50 million bond through the voters in 1999, interest rates were as high or higher then than they are now. So I've also had conversations with some Republicans who think that a bond is the right way to go on this. And they are big fans of the trail bond. And it's been heartening to hear that they worry a little bit that if it's in competition with other spending priorities within the appropriations bill, it will end up with less money and it won't be spread out over 4 years. And so it won't provide the sort of reliable ongoing funding source that a bond would provide that would enable towns and organizations to kind of plan for getting grant proposals in. So we're going to continue to make the case that the bond is actually the better way to go and that interest rates are not exorbitantly high in a historical context, and that this is one of the more popular bond proposals that we've ever seen.
That's great. And is there any consideration for long-term funding mechanism rather than a bond? Bob's asking in the chat.
That's a fantastic question. And I think many other states have put in place long-term funding mechanisms, and that would be wonderful. And we haven't figured out exactly what that might be, but there's a tremendous amount of interest in trying to figure out whether there might be an ongoing revenue stream that would provide state investment in a reliable way, kind of in perpetuity as part of in the same way that we're investing in other forms of infrastructure, just to make sure that that this form of infrastructure is at the same level.
Great.
Pete, I think one of the things people can do, that question hits on a really important piece of how do we change the conversation around long-term funding for trails. And I think one of the best things people can do is with their municipal trails that are on town-owned land, to talk to their municipal leaders and get them to change the mindset so that trails are treated the same way that local Little League parks and town parks are treated, which all are part of the budget for municipal, in a municipal budget. And oftentimes trails are neglected. And so one of the best ways we can do is go to our town managers and town leaders and get them to reconsider the way they apportion funds and put some funding into town trails. And I think if you start there, it will help trickle down the rest of the state.
Great, thanks.
Kristen, do you see that question from Paul Toll?
I was just going to ask that one. Yeah.
Okay.
This
So
is
to
our
pose
last
the question, yeah.
Our last question. So Paul says that he helped manage a Nordic skiing and mountain bike facility for years and experienced a level of volunteer withdrawal once they paid contractors to do similar work. So is curious about the potential impact of increased trail funding and paid workers on our critical volunteer pools.
So I don't have a great answer to that, and Paul probably has better insight than I do. But I do hear a refrain coming from lots of directions, which is a tremendous worry that the number of volunteers is declining for trail work. And this is with snowmobile clubs, this is with all manner of other trail work, and that it's hard to sustain a reliable pool of volunteers. So I don't know, I I don't believe that bringing paid contractors in to build bridges and do like some of the really significant trail work necessarily is going to drive volunteers away. I think but it is an issue that does need to be managed. But if we don't provide funding like this, and we don't invest and bring in professional trail builders, then we will definitely fall short of what Chris Riley has described as the opportunity and to some extent the urgency of catching up with other states around us that are doing a better job of this than we are.
I can also answer that a little bit, because here in Central Maine, we were 100% volunteer based when we started, and we saw the declining volunteer hours. We captured numbers for a while, and we usually had 1,000 hours a year of volunteerism, and we still are on our best years, we get that, and that, again, a lot of people don't report volunteer hours, so we figure there's probably about 30% that go uncaptured. But we're in our 5th year of having a paid trail crew in the summertime, and what we found is that it's a wonderful balance between trail building is really hard work. It's backbreaking labor, and if you can get volunteer crews in to do some of the easier work of establishing corridor, just clearing the stuff that's on the ground, and leaving the sort of canvas, if you will, for the stronger backs, then when the volunteers show up at the end and they see what they started, there's a really great sort of emotional feedback they get from having been part of the project, but they don't have to have been there day in and day out, and I find that we do Tuesday night trail work in our region, and you see a face 3 or 4 times and it's they're 2-hour stints. You see them between 2 and 4 times a season, and then after that, people will tend to feel like they've just given enough. And so I think we really need the balance. We have to have volunteers. We can't do it without it. But if we're really going to do what we need to do in this state to maintain trails and to upgrade trails, make them more durable, make them deal with the weather changes that we're seeing, and the increased use, we have to have people that are getting a paycheck and showing up and are able to build a trail as part of their job. Because you're just going to have a different end result. And so you can't have one without the other, but I think, I hope that answers your question, Paul.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
And
thanks, Chris.
Doug has a nice little comment also. That
Right,
both are
saying that-
needed.
But yeah, regular and seasonal maintenance is great for volunteers, but construction
Yeah.
and renovation is great for trail
Yeah,
crews.
Doug, I should have just let Doug just say it, because he said it way more efficiently than I did.
And I know we're at time, but Ellie, I saw you nodding your head. Did you have anything you wanted to add? No? Okay, great.
Oh, yeah, I can just echo from our perspective, Chris's point that the balance of paid trail crew with volunteers is amazing, and it's kind of the best way to see projects through, as well as find people who have that emotional connection and provide the right opportunities for them to kind of continue strengthening that emotional bond, and stewarding volunteer relationships that way. So just wanted to share my agreement.
Awesome, thanks so much.
Let me
What
just
would
close
happen-
with one.
Oh,
Let me
okay.
just share one final thought. I really love the idea of the people of Maine have an opportunity to vote yes for trails. I think that would be such a wonderful experience, educating. I mean, the campaign would involve so many conversations about both what trails we have, what we could become, and to introduce people to trails and tap into that love that people have of our trails. So, but to do that, we're up against some pretty significant challenges, and we really need your involvement to communicate to your legislators in support of this, so that it kind of punches through the cloud of information at the State House, and people over there who will be voting hear you and and then vote accordingly to send this out to the people of Maine, which I think would be just a terrific opportunity to shine that spotlight on our trails.
Great. Thank you so much, Pete. And thank you so much, Chris and Ellie, for joining us today and sharing your perspectives. And thanks to everyone that joined in and contributed in the chat and in the Q&A box. It was great to see such an engaged crowd. And if we missed your question or something comes up after, feel free to reach out to us. Again, we'll send a follow-up email and you're welcome to respond to me and I can get your question to the right person. But we will send, again, that follow-up email with the recording and all the resources for you to take action and support the Maine Trails Bond. And thank you so much for being here today.